Up next, viewers, we're getting you some more important breaking developments as far as the geopolitical situation of Ukraine is concerned. Now, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister has said that Finland and Sweden joining NATO could have both political and military repercussions. Remember, this comes hours after there were multiple statements that had come in from Finland claiming that they are mulling joining the NATO after Russia's war in Ukraine. Remember, there are always been questions as to why Finland and Sweden have remained neutral and have not joined NATO. In fact, after the Cold War, Sweden had also, without much discussion, stated that they will not be a part of NATO in terms of an impending war that takes place. They do not want to be a part of it. On that note, let me take that question to also Pathikrit Prem, a geopolitical analyst who's joining us on the broadcast. Pathikrit, thank you for joining us here at Republic. I want to take this question to you. These kind of statements that are coming in from Moscow now with respect to neutral countries like Sweden and Finland also mulling over joining the NATO. Is Russia creating the NATO that they had once feared, Pathikrit?
Well, I think, yes, NATO had an objective. In fact, if you see the manner in which Ukraine has been left in the lurch and NATO did not come to help them, one of the objectives perhaps was to create destabilization in the region so that many of the countries in the adjacent areas will get panicky, will actually, start buying more weapon systems and will start getting drawn towards NATO. But there is another example. The example is of how NATO actually left Ukraine in the lurch. And I think that in the last few days have also been knocking in the minds of countries like Finland and Sweden, because even when they start the process of getting into NATO, it's not going to get over in 1 or 2 days. It's going to take long drawn time. And during that phase, when they're still not a member of NATO, but they have started the process, and if there is an attack by Russia or somebody else, though there is no somebody else in this scenario, it's only Russia, what would happen to these countries? Will they face the same fate as Ukraine is facing? That's one question I think many of those would also be having in their mind. But yes, there is panic in that whole eastern region, and they're getting extremely apprehensive. The bigger question is, it's also a reality. Countries like Finland and Sweden, for a long period of time, in spite of being part of European Union, were never part of NATO. NATO is a military grouping. So when you become part of a military grouping, then you always have an adversary. And when you decide to be part of NATO, then you have defined your adversary, which is Russia. And it's going to create a lot of repercussion. I think they'll still wait to see what happens in terms of the impact of the sanctions and whether it will actually embolden Russia to go further or weaken Russia. If it weakens Russia, then they'll be emboldened to join NATO. If it makes Russia far more resilient, then I think they will prefer to remain neutral than to actually go for a war, because Ukraine is the greatest of examples of what happens when you want to join an organization like NATO and NATO actually literally disowns you. Remember, this is not a war of independence of Ukraine going on. It's just about joining NATO, nothing else. So for the sake of joining an organization, a military grouping, if your country gets devastated, then it's better to remain neutral than to actually join a grouping. So I think there will be deliberations in countries like Finland and Sweden because they're very near to Russia. There will be some people or some
analysis that you've been putting forth, and it's very important to note that in fact Finland also shares a border of over 1,000 kilometers with Russia as well. And there are several statements that have come out from the ministers of Finland claiming that they are mulling over joining NATO. And of course, like you rightly mentioned, Russia had warned over the eastward expansion of NATO from the very beginning. I thank you, Pathikrit, for joining us with that analysis. Let us first also take a look at this 1-minute report, and then we bring you all the breaking updates.
Air raid sirens wailed across the Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia as Russia widened its offensive in Ukraine. The offensive comes as Russia faces new trade sanctions from the US and its allies.
The totality of our sanctions and export controls is crushing the Russian economy.
Russia struck airfields in the west and an industrial city in eastern Ukraine as its invasion reached the 17th day. In Washington, President Joe Biden has announced that the US will dramatically downgrade its trade status with Russia and ban imports of Russian seafood, alcohol and diamonds. Meanwhile, the massive Russian armored column that has been stalled for over a week outside Kiev was on the move again, spreading out into forests and towns near the capital. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Well,